The radio crackled as Officer Marcus Williams pulled his midnight blue Mustang GT into his own driveway, exhausted from a 12-hour shift. But as he stepped out, 3 squad cars surrounded him, red and blue lights painting his suburban home in chaos. "Get on the ground now," his own colleagues screamed, weapons drawn. Marcus raised his hands, badge glinting in the strobing light, as his neighbors watched from windows. They'd called in a suspicious black man with an expensive car, not knowing he was the cop who'd been protecting their streets for 8 years. Tonight, everything would. The Michigan autumn air bit at Marcus Williams' face as he turned onto Maple Street, the rumble of his 2023 Mustang GT's V8 engine echoing between the neat rows of colonial houses. After pulling back-to-back shifts covering for sick colleagues, all he wanted was to collapse into bed beside his sleeping wife and forget about the chaos of downtown Detroit for a few hours. He'd worked hard for this moment. The house, the top car, the quiet suburban life that felt like a reward for 8 years of walking the thin blue line. The Mustang had been his dream since childhood, saved for penny by penny on a cop's salary, finally purchased 6 months ago when Sarah got her promotion at the hospital. Deep blue metallic paint gleamed under the streetlights as he pulled into the driveway of 4247 Maple Street. Marcus killed the engine and sat for a moment in the leather seat, watching the porch light Sarah had left on for him. Through the living room window, he could see the glow of their television, probably still playing whatever Netflix show she'd fallen asleep watching. This was home. This was peace. He grabbed his gym bag from the passenger seat and stepped out, his duty boots crunching on the fallen leaves scattered across the concrete. The neighborhood was tomb quiet at 1:47 a.m., just the distant hum of the highway and the occasional dog bark. Perfect. Inside the house, 68-year-old Eleanor Henderson peered through her bedroom curtains at the scene unfolding next door. She'd been awakened by the deep rumble of the engine, too loud, too aggressive for their peaceful street. Her fingers found her reading glasses on the nightstand. As she squinted at the figure emerging from the expensive sports car, a young black man, tall and broad-shouldered, wearing dark clothing and carrying what looked like a bag, Eleanor's heart began to race. This wasn't right. The Williamses were a lovely couple, but they drove sensible cars, Sarah's Honda Civic and Marcus's police cruiser when he brought it home. This stranger, with his flashy muscle car, didn't belong here. Eleanor had lived on Maple Street for 30 years. Had watched it transform from a working-class neighborhood to an upscale suburban enclave. She knew every resident, every routine, every car that belonged. This didn't fit the pattern. Her arthritic fingers fumbled for her phone on the nightstand. Channel 7 News ran stories every night about carjackings, home invasions, drug dealers using expensive cars to blend into nice neighborhoods. The young man was now walking toward the Williams house with purpose. Bag in hand, Eleanor's mind raced through possibilities, each more frightening than the last. She dialed 911. Detroit Police, what's your emergency? There's a suspicious person at 4247 Maple Street, Eleanor whispered urgently into the phone. A young black male with an expensive sports car, approaching the house. I think he might be trying to break in. Ma'am, can you describe the vehicle? It's a Mustang, dark blue, very loud. He's carrying a bag and wearing dark clothes. The homeowners are asleep, their bedroom light went out hours ago. Are you in immediate danger? I don't know, but something's not right. This car doesn't belong in our neighborhood, and he's acting suspicious. Looking around before approaching the house. Across the street, Tom Bradley rolled over in bed as his wife Janet shook him awake. Tom, look outside. Eleanor's right. There's someone at the Williams place. Tom stumbled to the window, his vision blurry without glasses. The muscular figure was now at the front door, bag still in hand. That's not Marcus's car. Tom muttered. Way too expensive. And Marcus is smaller than that guy. Should we call the police? Eleanor probably already did, but yeah. Better safe than sorry. Within minutes, 3 more calls flooded the dispatch center. Mrs. Peterson from 2 houses down reported a possible burglary in progress. The Kowalskis described a young black male casing the Williams residence. Young Ashley Morrison Hone, from college, live-streamed the scene to her friends while calling it in as a potential home invasion. None of them recognized Marcus Williams without his uniform. Marcus had just inserted his key into the front door when he heard the first siren in the distance, probably heading to some late-night domestic call downtown. He thought absently that lock turned smoothly, and he stepped into the familiar warmth of his foyer. Baby, Sarah's sleepy voice called from upstairs. That you? Yeah, it's me. Go back to sleep, he called softly, setting his gym bag down and slipping off his boots. The sirens were getting closer now, multiple units by the sound of it. Big call, somewhere. Marcus felt a familiar pang of guilt for not being out there with his brothers in blue, but his lieutenant had ordered him home after 18 hours on duty. He was reaching for the light switch when the first set of red and blue strobes painted his living room window, then another, then another. Marcus froze, his cop instincts immediately alert. 3 units minimum, all converging on his street. That wasn't normal for Maple Street. This was a low-crime area, which was exactly why he and Sarah had chosen it. His hand moved instinctively to where his service weapon would be, then remembered. He'd locked it in the gun safe upstairs after his shift. The sirens stopped abruptly, replaced by the slam of car doors and the crackle of police radios. Marcus moved to the window and peered through the blinds. His blood turned to ice. 3 Detroit police cruisers were positioned in a tactical formation around his house. Officers were taking cover behind open doors, and in the harsh LED spotlights, he could see at least 6 cops with weapons drawn, all pointed at his front door. Marcus. Sarah appeared at the top of the stairs in her scrubs, having fallen asleep after her own late shift at the hospital. What's going on? Why are there police cars outside? Before Marcus could answer, a voice boomed through a megaphone from outside. This is the Detroit Police Department. We have the house surrounded. Come out with your hands visible. Sarah gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Marcus, what I don't know, he said, but even as the words left his mouth, a sick understanding began to dawn. The expensive car, the late hour, the upscale neighborhood, his dark skin, his own colleagues were treating him like a criminal. Anyone inside the residence, exit immediately with your hands up. Do not make any sudden movements. Marcus's mind raced through protocols, through training scenarios, through 8 years of experience that told him exactly what was happening outside his door. High-risk stop. Possible B&E suspect. Multiple units for officer safety. Everything. By the book. Everything except they were surrounding the wrong man. Baby, what do we do? Sarah whispered, fear making her voice shake. Marcus looked at his terrified wife. Then at the door that led to his front yard full of cops who should have recognized him, should have known this was his house, his car, his life. The bitter irony wasn't lost on him. He'd been on the other side of scenes like this dozens of times, never once considering that the suspect might be coming home from his own job, might belong in the house they were surrounding. I'm going out there, he said quietly. Marcus, no, I have to. Sarah, if I don't, this gets worse. He moved toward the door, his hands already rising, his mind automatically cataloging every detail the way he'd been trained. Officer safety positions, sight lines, fields of fire. The same tactical awareness that had kept him alive on Detroit's streets was now focused on surviving an encounter with his own department. Marcus Williams. Badge number 4847, 8-year veteran of the Detroit Police Department. Opened his front door and stepped onto his own porch with his hands raised high above his head. I'm Marcus Williams, Detroit PD, he shouted into the blinding spotlights. Badge number 4847. This is my house. But the spotlights made it impossible to see faces, impossible to recognize colleagues who might know him. The voice that came back through the megaphone was cold, official, and completely unfamiliar. Get on the ground now. Do not move. Hands where we can see them. As Marcus slowly lowered himself to his knees on his own front porch, surrounded by his own brothers in blue, he realized that 8 years of wearing the badge meant nothing when you were on the wrong side of the spotlight. The neighbors who had called this in were still watching from their windows, and Marcus could feel their eyes on him like weights. He was no longer Officer Williams, coming home from work. He was just another black man with an expensive car in a neighborhood where someone had decided he didn't belong. The handcuffs clicked shut around his wrists with a sound that would haunt him for the rest of his life. The concrete of Marcus's own porch bit into his knees as Officer Jake Morsina, rookie Marcus didn't recognize, pressed him forward, hands zip-tied behind his back. The LED spotlights turned everything into harsh shadows and blinding white, making it impossible for Marcus to see which of his colleagues were behind the weapons still trained on him. I'm telling you, I'm Detroit Pete, Marcus said again, forcing his voice to remain calm and professional despite the rage building in his chest. Badge 4847. Call Lieutenant Rodriguez. Call anyone from the 7th Precinct. Sure you are, Morrison muttered, patting down Marcus with unnecessary roughness. And I'm the chief of police. From behind the safety of her bedroom window, Eleanor Henderson watched with grim satisfaction. She'd been right to call it in. The young man was now in custody, and her neighborhood was safe again. She made a mental note to call the community watch coordinator in the morning. This kind of quick police response was exactly why their annual dues were worth paying. Ma'am, we're going to need a statement. Detective Lisa Park approached Eleanor's front door, notepad in hand. Park was a 15-year veteran with sharp eyes and sharper instincts, but she'd never worked with Marcus Williams. The 7th Precinct and her downtown unit rarely crossed paths. Eleanor wrapped her robe tighter as she opened the door. Of course, officer, I saw the whole thing. Tell me what you observed. Well, it was nearly 2 in the morning when I heard this loud car, one of those muscle cars. You know, very expensive looking. A young black man got out, carrying a bag, and went straight to the Williams house like he belonged there. Park scribbled notes. Did you see him attempt to enter the residence? He went right to the door with a key or something, bold as brass. Poor Sarah Williams was probably asleep, had no idea someone was breaking into her house. And you're certain this individual doesn't live at that address? Eleanor nodded emphatically. I've lived here 34 years, detective. I know everyone on this street. The Williams are a lovely couple. She's a nurse. He's a police officer, but they drive normal cars. Honda, maybe a Toyota. Not some flashy sports car that costs more than most people make in a year. Park's pen stopped moving. Did you say the homeowner is a police officer? Oh yes. Marcus Williams. Nicest young man you'd ever want to meet. Works downtown, I think. Always waves when he sees me in the garden. A cold realization began creeping up Park's spine. Mrs. Henderson, what does Marcus Williams look like? Well, he's a black gentleman. Mid-30s, maybe? Tall, athletic build, very polite, always in uniform when I see him. Eleanor paused, a flicker of uncertainty crossing her face. Why do you ask? Detective Park was already moving toward the squad cars, her radio in hand. Unit 47. What's the status on the suspect? Morrison's voice crackled back. Secured and ready for transport. Guy keeps claiming he's a cop, but no ID on him. Don't move him, Park ordered sharply. I'm coming over. She jogged across the street, her mind racing through the implications. If Eleanor Henderson was right about the homeowner being a police officer, and if her description matched the man currently in custody, Marcus sat on his porch steps, zip ties cutting into his wrists, watching his neighbors peek through curtains and doorways. Some he'd helped before jump-starting Tom Bradley's car last winter, helping the Kowalskis bring in groceries when Mr. Kowalski threw out his back. Now they stared at him like he was a dangerous stranger. Officer Morrison, Detective Park called. As she approached, I need to speak with you. Sure thing, Detective. Clean bust on this one. Multiple witnesses called in a B&E in progress. Park looked down at Marcus, studying his face in the harsh light. Something about his calm demeanor, the way he held himself, triggered her cop instincts. Most burglary suspects were either panicked or belligerent when caught. This man seemed frustrated but controlled, like someone accustomed to high situations. What's your name? She asked Marcus directly. Marcus Williams, badge number 4847, Detroit PD, 7th Precinct. My lieutenant is Alina Rodriguez. My partner is Danny Kowalski and, before you ask, no relation to the neighbors who probably called this in. Park's eyebrows shot up. Those weren't details a random criminal would know. What's your sergeant's name? Mike Patterson. Been there 12 years. Drives a beat-up Chevy Tahoe, drinks too much coffee, and has a scar on his left hand from a knife call in 2019. Morrison looked between them uncertainly. Detective, he's had plenty of time to make up a story. Check his back pocket? Marcus interrupted, carefully. My wallet should be there with my department ID. Morrison hesitated, then reached into Marcus's back pocket and pulled out a black leather wallet. He flipped it open, and his face went pale in the spotlight's glare. Detective Park, Morrison's voice was barely a whisper. This is this is his house. The Detroit Police Department identification card showed Marcus Williams, badge number 4847, with an address of 4247 Maple Street. Morrison's hands began to shake as he realized what they'd done. Cut those restraints. Now. Park's voice was sharp with authority and growing dread as the zip ties fell away. Marcus rubbed his wrists and stood slowly, his dignity intact despite everything. The other officers, who'd maintained their tactical positions, began to lower their weapons as word spread through the radio chatter. Officer Williams Park said formally, I apologize for this misunderstanding. Misunderstanding. Marcus repeated the word like it tasted bitter. That's what we're calling it. Inside the house, Sarah had been watching through the living room window, her heart hammering against her ribs. She'd called Marcus's lieutenant 3 times, leaving increasingly frantic voicemails. When she saw the restraints being removed, she flew out the front door. Marcus. Oh God, are you okay? She threw her arms around him, not caring about the dozen cops still standing in their yard. I'm fine, baby, he said softly, but his voice carried an edge Sarah had never heard before. Just a case of mistaken identity. Detective Park cleared her throat. Ma'am, I'm Detective Park. Are you Mrs. Williams? Dr. Williams, Sarah corrected sharply, her protective instincts flaring. And yes, this is my husband, Officer Marcus Williams, who was coming home from his shift at the 7th Precinct, the same shift where he probably helped protect half the people standing in our yard right now. The irony wasn't lost on anyone present. Morrison looked like he wanted to disappear into the pavement. The other officers shuffled uncomfortably, their tactical formation dissolving into an awkward cluster of men and women who'd just made a career-ending mistake. How did this happen? Marcus asked, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. Someone called in a black man with an expensive car, and you automatically assumed I was a criminal? Park consulted her notepad. We received multiple calls about a suspicious person attempting to break into 4247 Maple Street. The callers reported a black man who didn't look like he belonged here, Marcus finished. In my own neighborhood, at my own house. Officer Williams, Morrison started, his rookie nervousness making his voice crack. I want to apologize, don't. Marcus held up a hand. Don't apologize to me, Morrison. Apologize to every black man you've ever stopped because he was driving a nice car in the wrong neighborhood. Apologize to every family you've terrorized because someone called in a suspicious person who was just living their life. The yard fell silent except for the crackle of radios and the distant hum of traffic. The neighbors who'd called in the reports were starting to realize what had happened, and several had quietly retreated from their windows. What happens now? Sarah asked, her arms still protectively around her husband's waist. Detective Park looked around at the tactical response team, the damaged front lawn, the neighbors still peering from doorways. Now we file our reports and try to figure out how to prevent this from happening again. That's it. Marcus's voice was dangerously quiet. File reports. Officer Williams, I understand you're upset. Marcus stepped forward, and several officers instinctively tensed. I'm not upset, detective. I'm enlightened. For 8 years, I've been part of this system, believing that the badge made me different, made me safe. Tonight, I learned that when the lights are flashing and the guns are drawn, I'm just another black man who doesn't belong. He turned to address the officers still clustered in his yard. How many of you have worked with me? How many of you have had my back in dangerous situations? How many of you would have recognized me if I'd been white? The silence stretched uncomfortably. Officer Jennifer Walsh, a 10-year veteran from the 7th Precinct, finally stepped forward from behind one of the squad cars. Her face was stricken with recognition and shame. Marcus, she said quietly, I was here the whole time. I knew it was you. The admission hit like a physical blow. Marcus stared at his colleague, someone he'd shared patrol cars with, someone whose children he'd bought Christmas presents for, and saw the truth written across her face. And you said nothing. Walsh's eyes filled with tears. The situation, was already in motion. I didn't want to interfere with the scene. I didn't want to interfere. Marcus's voice was barely controlled. You watched your partner get handcuffed on his own porch because you didn't want to interfere. Sarah tightened her grip on Marcus's arm, sensing the explosion building inside him. Part 3. The precinct felt different when Marcus walked through the doors at 6:47 a.m. 43 minutes before his shift officially started. The familiar sounds, ringing phones, radio chatter, the clatter of keyboards, seemed muted, as if he were hearing them through water. 3 hours of sleep had done nothing to dull the sharp edges of the previous night's revelation. Detective Walsh was already at her desk, hunched over paperwork with the desperate focus of someone avoiding eye contact. She'd arrived an hour early, Marcus noted, probably hoping to get through the morning routine before facing him. The irony wasn't lost on him after 8 years of partnership. She was now afraid of the man whose back she'd failed to watch when it mattered most. Williams' Lieutenant Alina Rodriguez appeared at his elbow, coffee mug in hand, and concern etched across her weathered face. At 52, Rodriguez had seen everything the job could throw at her, but the phone call she'd received at 3 a.m. had shaken even her considerable composure. My office. Now. The lieutenant's office was a cramped rectangle with yellowing walls covered in computations, crime statistics, and photos of Rodriguez with various police breasts. Marcus had been in this room hundreds of times for briefings, performance reviews, and the occasional disciplinary chat. Today, it felt like entering a courtroom. Sit down, Rodriguez said, closing the door behind them, and tell me what the hell happened last night. Marcus remained standing. You read the reports, Lieutenant? Multiple units responded to a suspicious person. Call at my address. They handcuffed me on my own porch and held me at gunpoint for 12 minutes before anyone bothered to check my ID. That's not what I'm asking, and you know it. Rodriguez set down her coffee and studied Marcus with the intensity that had made her one of the department's most effective interrogators. I'm asking why Jennifer Walsh called me crying at 3 in the morning, why Detective Park filed a preliminary report recommending departmental review, and why Officer Morrison submitted a request for transfer before his shift even ended. Maybe because they realized they screwed up. Marcus. Rodriguez's voice softened slightly. Talk to me. We've worked together for 6 years. I've seen you handle gang shootouts, domestic violence calls that would break most people, and that hostage situation on Corktown where you talked a suicidal vet off a bridge. You don't rattle easily, but right now, you look like you're ready to burn the whole place down. Marcus finally sat, but his posture remained rigid. You want to know? What rattles me? Lieutenants, having my own colleagues, people I've bled with, treat me like I'm public enemy number 1. Because some scared neighbors called in a suspicious black man. You want to know what breaks me? Finding out that Jennifer Walsh recognized me the entire time and chose to stay silent while I was being humiliated in front of my wife and my neighbors. Rodriguez winced. She'd read that detail in Walsh's report, and it had made her stomach turn. Jennifer made a mistake. A mistake? Marcus leaned forward. If that had been Officer Thompson getting cuffed, or Officer Martinez, or any white cop on this force, would Walsh have stayed quiet? Would she have let it play out because she didn't want to interfere? The question hung in the air like smoke. Rodriguez had no answer because they both knew the truth. A knock at the door interrupted the tension. Come in, Rodriguez called. Detective Park entered, looking like she'd slept even less than Marcus. Lieutenant, I have the preliminary findings from last night's incident. Let's hear it. Park consulted her tablet. We received 4 separate calls between 1:52 and 1:58 a.m. reporting suspicious activity at 4247 Maple Street. All callers described a black male, late 20s to mid-30s, athletic build. Approaching the residence with a bag, Mrs. Eleanor Henderson was the primary caller. She specifically mentioned the suspect didn't belong in the neighborhood and was driving an expensive vehicle inconsistent with the area's typical demographics. Inconsistent with the area's typical demographics, Marcus repeated slowly. That's a fancy way of saying too nice a car for a black man to own legally. Park continued uncomfortably. The responding units followed standard protocol for a possible B&E in progress. High-risk approach, tactical positioning, verbal commands for the suspect to exit the residence. Standard protocol, Rodriguez mused. For a neighborhood with virtually zero crime, at an address where one of our own officers lives? Did anyone run the address through the system before rolling out with tactical response? That's where things get complicated. Park shifted her weight. The address is listed in our database as Officer Williams's residence. But the dispatchers were handling multiple priority calls, and with 4 separate reports of a crime in progress. They sent units without cross-referencing, Rodriguez finished. And once those units arrived and saw a black man at a house in an upscale neighborhood, they assumed the worst. Marcus stood abruptly. Can I go now? I have actual police work to do. Marcus, wait. Rodriguez held up a hand. What do you want to happen here? I can recommend counseling, additional sensitivity training for the responding officers, a formal review of our dispatch protocols. You want to know what I want? Marcus turned back, and Rodriguez saw something dangerous flickering in his eyes. I want Officer Morrison to spend one night in handcuffs on his own porch while his neighbors watch. I want Detective Park to explain to her family why strange cops are pointing guns at their house. I want Jennifer Walsh to look in the mirror and ask herself when she became the kind of cop who protects the system instead of her partner. He moved toward the door, then stopped. But mostly, Lieutenant, I want to find out who else in this department would stand by and watch while one of their own gets treated like a criminal. Because after last night, I'm not sure who I can trust to have my back when it really matters. The door closed behind Marcus with a soft click that somehow sounded like a gunshot. Rodriguez looked at Detective Park, who was staring at her tablet like it contained nuclear launch codes. Your assessment, Detective? Honestly, we're lucky he didn't resign on the spot. Most cops would have. And the department's exposure, Park grimaced. If Officer Williams files a formal complaint, Internal Affairs will have to investigate. If he goes to the media, we're looking at a public relations nightmare. If he decides to sue, Christ. Rodriguez rubbed her temples. What's your recommendation? Damage control, fast, full transparency, immediate policy review, and pray that Marcus Williams cares more about the badge than he does about payback. Outside in the bullpen, Marcus sat at his desk and opened his computer, logging into the departmental database with mechanical precision. Around him, the familiar rhythm of the morning shift continued, officers reviewing overnight reports, detectives following up on cases, the constant background hum of a police station gearing up for another day. But everything had changed. Detective Collins from Narcotics wandered over with a cup of coffee and his usual morning gossip. Hey Marcus, heard there was some excitement on your street last night. Everything okay? The casual question stopped conversations at nearby desks. Marcus looked up to find half the bullpen watching him, waiting to see how he'd handle it. Word had already spread cops were worse gossips than hairdressers. Yeah, Tom, some neighbors called in a suspicious black man in their neighborhood. Turned out to be me coming home from work. Collins shifted uncomfortably. Aw man, that sucks. But hey, at least it got sorted out quickly, right? 23 minutes, Marcus said quietly. 23 minutes on my knees, hands zip-tied with guns pointed at my head, while Jennifer Walsh watched from behind a squad car and said nothing. The bullpen went dead silent. Collins looked around nervously, clearly wishing he'd stayed at his own desk. Well, I mean, These things happen. Mistaken identity. Nobody got hurt. Marcus stood slowly, his chair rolling backward. Nobody got hurt. I didn't mean Tom. Let me ask you something. Marcus's voice carried clearly across the now sealant room. You live in Grass Point, right? Nice neighborhood? Big house? Drive that new F-150? Yeah, but I don't see what if your neighbors called the cops on you for driving too nice a truck in too nice a neighborhood. How long do you think it would take for the responding officers to recognize you? How long before someone said, hey wait, that's Detective Collins from Narcotics? Collins opened his mouth, then closed it. I'll tell you how long, Marcus continued. About 30 seconds. Because white cops don't get mistaken for criminals in their own driveways. White cops don't get held at gunpoint while their partners watch silently. White cops don't have to worry about whether their expensive car makes them look suspicious. He walked past Collins toward the door, then stopped and addressed the room. But here's what really hurts. After last night, I realized that some of you people I've worked with for years, people I've trusted with my life, would rather protect the system than protect me. So now I get to come to work every day wondering which of my brothers and sisters will have my back when it matters. and which ones will stand by and watch while I get treated like the enemy? Marcus headed for the door, leaving behind a room full of cops who suddenly found their paperwork very interesting in the parking garage. He sat in his Mustang for 10 minutes, hands on the steering wheel, engine off. The car that had brought him so much joy now felt Part 4. The suspicious person call led Marcus to Riverfront Towers, an upscale apartment complex where a concerned resident had reported a black man in a business suit loitering near the parking garage. Marcus arrived to find 26 Kevin Thompson, a software engineer, standing beside his Tesla Model S while talking on his phone to his girlfriend about dinner plans. "Sir, I'm Officer Williams with Detroit PD," Marcus said, approaching with his hands visible and his voice. "I received a call about suspicious activity. Can you tell me what you're doing here?" Kevin looked confused. "I live here, Building C, Apartment 1247. I was just getting something from my car." Marcus nodded, already knowing how this would play out. "Can I see some identification?" As Kevin reached for his wallet, Marcus keyed his radio. "Dispatch, Unit 4847. I'm on scene with the suspicious person. Can you patch me through to the reporting party?" "Stand by, 4847. Mrs. Patricia Whitman answered on the second ring, her voice tight with righteous concern. "Officer, thank goodness, you're there. Is the situation under control?" "Ma'am, this is Officer Williams. I'm here with the individual you reported. Can you describe exactly what suspicious behavior you observed?" "Well, he was just standing there by that expensive car, looking around like he was planning something. You know how they operate, they case these upscale buildings, looking for easy targets." Kevin's eyes widened as he realized he was listening to someone describe him as a threat for existing in his own parking garage. "Ma'am," Marcus continued, "the individual in question is Kevin Thompson. He lives in Building C, Apartment 1247. He was retrieving something from his own vehicle, a Tesla Model S that he owns, and that's legally parked in his assigned space." Silence on the radio. "Ma'am, are you still there?" "Well, how was I supposed to know he lived here? Young black men with expensive cars. You hear about these things on the news." Marcus looked at Kevin, who was staring at the radio in disbelief. "Mr. Thompson, how long have you lived here?" 3 years, Kevin said quietly. "I helped organize the building's charity drive last Christmas. Mrs. Whitman was there. She's seen me dozens of times." Marcus keyed the radio again. "Ma'am, Mr. Thompson says you've met before at building events. Do you remember him now?" Another long pause. "Well, maybe. They all look, it's hard to remember everyone. They all look alike," Marcus repeated flatly. "Is that what you were going to say, ma'am?" "Officer, I don't appreciate your tone. I called because I was concerned about the safety of our building." "No, ma'am. You called because you saw a black man with an expensive car and automatically assumed he was a criminal, just like the neighbors on Maple Street did to me 2 nights ago when I came home from my shift protecting this city." Kevin stared at Marcus with sudden understanding. "You're the cop from the news, the one who got arrested at his own house." "Not arrested," Marcus corrected. "Detained, handcuffed, held at gunpoint by my own colleagues. Because neighbors, just like Mrs. Whitman, decided I didn't belong in my own neighborhood." He turned back to the radio. "Mrs. Whitman, I need you to think very carefully about your answer to this next question. In the 3 years Mr. Thompson has lived in your building, how many times have you called the police on white residents standing by their cars?" Silence. "I'll take that as 0, Marcus continued. "Mr. Thompson, you're free to go about your day. Ma'am, you might want to consider getting to know your neighbors before assuming they're criminals." As Kevin walked toward his building, he stopped and turned back. "Officer Williams, thank you for handling that the right way." Marcus nodded, but his expression remained grim. "Don't thank me yet, Mr. Thompson. Thank me when this stops happening altogether." Over the next 6 hours, Marcus responded to 4 more suspicious person calls. Each one followed the same pattern. Black men in situations where their presence was deemed inappropriate by white callers. A father picking up his daughter from soccer practice at a suburban sports complex. A delivery driver taking a break in his truck. A college student waiting for an Uber outside a coffee shop. A contractor measuring windows at a job site. Each time, Marcus made the same radio request: patch him through to the reporting party. Each time he forced them to explain their assumptions, to confront their biases, to hear their own prejudices reflected back at them through his calm, professional questions. By 3 p.m., the pattern was so obvious that even dispatch began to notice. "Unit 4847, came the voice of Sergeant Patterson over the radio. "Return to station for briefing." Marcus found Patterson waiting in the parking lot, leaning against his beat-up Tahoe with his arms crossed. At 58, Mike Patterson had seen everything the job could offer, and his weathered face told the story of 3 decades on Detroit's streets. "Williams, got a minute?" "What's up, Sarge?" Patterson studied Marcus with the calculating look of a supervisor who'd identified a problem. "Dispatch tells me you've handled 6 suspicious person calls today, all involving black males, all resulting in no action taken." "That's right. They also tell me you're requesting to speak directly With reporting parties, asking detailed questions about their observations and motivations, Marcus leaned against his patrol car. Standard follow-up, Sarge. Making sure we have all the facts. Standard follow-up, my ass. Patterson stepped closer. You're making a point, and while I understand why, I need to know if you're planning to turn every call into a racial sensitivity seminar. I'm doing my job, investigating complaints, determining if crimes have been committed, educating the public about appropriate use of emergency services. You're walking a line, Marcus, a thin one. Marcus straightened up, his voice hardening. You want to know about thin lines, Sarge? 2 nights ago, I walked the thinnest line of all, the one between being a cop and being a suspect. My own department. Crossed that line when they decided I looked too dangerous to belong in my own neighborhood. Patterson sighed heavily. Look, I get it. What happened to you is wrong. But turning every suspicious person call into a teaching moment isn't going to fix the system. Maybe not. But it's going to make people think twice before they call 911 because they see a black man existing in their space. And what happens when you miss a real threat because you're too busy lecturing concerned citizens? The question hit like a physical blow. Marcus had been asking himself the same thing all day, walking the razor's edge between making a point and compromising public safety. Sarge, in 8 years on this job, how many suspicious blackmail calls have you seen that turned out to be actual threats? Patterson considered the question, few and far between. And how many have been exactly what we saw today? Law-abiding citizens whose only crime was being black in the wrong place at the wrong time. More than I'd like to admit. Marcus nodded. So maybe it's time we stopped treating every call like a potential threat and started treating them like potential teachable moments. Maybe it's time we asked callers to justify their suspicions before we send armed officers to investigate someone's existence. Patterson was quiet for a long moment, staring at the ground. When he looked up, his expression was troubled. Marcus, can I ask you something? Off the record. Shoot. Are you planning to stay with the department? The question hung in the afternoon air like exhaust fumes. Marcus realized he'd been avoiding thinking about it, focusing instead on the immediate satisfaction of forcing uncomfortable conversations about race and assumptions. I don't know, he said finally. 2 days ago, I would have said absolutely. This job was my calling, you know? Serve and protect. Be part of something bigger than myself. Make a difference in my community. And now, Marcus looked at his patrol car, at the badge on his chest, at the precinct building where he'd spent 8 years believing he belonged. Now I wonder if I was just fooling myself. If the system I've been serving was never designed to serve people who look like me. That's not true, Marcus. You've made a difference. I've seen the commendations, the community letters, the lives you've impacted. Have I just been the acceptable face of a department that treats people like me as threats when we're not wearing the uniform? Patterson didn't have an answer. Marcus's radio crackled to life. Unit 4847. We have a domestic violence call. Cass Avenue. Female caller reports her boyfriend is threatening her with a weapon. Marcus looked at Patterson, who nodded grimly. Go, we'll finish this conversation later. As Marcus drove toward the domestic call, his mind raced through everything that had changed in the past 48 hours. The certainty he'd once felt about his role, his purpose, his place in the thin blue line, all of it, had been shattered by 23 minutes on his own front porch. But as he pulled up to a rundown apartment building where a terrified woman waited for help, Marcus realized something else. Regardless of how the system had failed him, there were still people who needed protection. Still victims who deserved justice. Still a community that depended on cops who cared enough to do the job right. The apartment door was answered by Maria Santos, 24 years old with a split lip and terror in her eyes. Behind her, Marcus could see an overturned table and a hole punched through the drywall. Ma'am, I'm Officer Williams. You called about a domestic situation. He's gone now, Maria whispered, glancing nervously down the hallway. But he said he's coming back. He said,